I wish I had something optimistic to say. I really do. And I hold on to just glimmers of hope because I feel like it's the only thing we have. Um, these states will not act unless there is pressure on them from within the states themselves. Clearly, we've seen that. We've seen that there is a solution. There is the ability to, it's not a question of ability. It's a question of will. Will they do it? They can. They're just refusing to do so. But as long as in the same way that as long as there's no pressure on Israel, why would they stop? I mean, what is their ultimate goal? Well, land, stealing more and more Palestinian land. Israel is an expansionist state. Um, it they want more and more land, not just Palestinian land, but we've seen the way that they're continuing the occupation of the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, and going into even further Syrian territory. We see the occupation of southern Lebanon, which we've seen in the past as well, and continued presence right now. So there is the fact that ideologically speaking, you have an expansionist state that adheres to a ethno-nationalist belief of Jewish supremacy. Like these are aspects of the Israeli state that we have to really grapple with. You can't just say there's something, pragmatic about it, but there's something ideologically zealous about it too. Like why don't we ever talk about religious like fundamentalism or extremism when we talk about the state of Israel? Because we're having that conversation in the West, and in the Western narrative, there's an attempt to whitewash all of that. So you hear all the time about, if it's Muslims, there we talk about religious extremism, but for some reason Israel is never talked about in that way in the Western world, and yet all of that is playing into the sort of objectives that we're talking about. And you can talk about the material objectives, right? The idea that, well, why do they want more land? Well, Gaza has a bunch of resources. Why not want the land? Why not take land? Because land has resources. So there's those applications as well. As far as where we're going, unless there is pressure within third party states to act to therefore put pressure on Israel, I don't see any scenario in which things will change. Now, what would pressure from within look like? We're seeing, like I said, glimmers of hope. We're seeing a little bit of that, like the consequences of elections. There were many factors that played into the 2024 election in the United States. And I'm not saying that Gaza was a central factor, but it was a significant factor. The fact that we had protests at Biden's rallies and then Harris's rallies throughout the period of 2024 because of the genocide in Gaza, that in and of itself brought attention, negative attention, onto that administration and a continuation of that administration. That's not to say that the Trump administration is serving Palestinian interests in any way. It's simply to say that many Americans found themselves in a position where they could not, in good conscience, vote for an administration that claimed to be against fascism while supporting fascism in Israel, while supporting a genocide of all things. So there
Right.
are consequences to it. The election of Mamdani, I think, as a in the New York mayoral race, is another important indication or sign where the central attack on him, which is so bizarre, if you just take 1 minute to think about how weird is it that in a New York City mayoral race, Israel is a key factor. Foreign
Right.
policy is not really a New York mayoral issue. But for some reason, this is brought into our political discourse, even in local elections. But despite that, despite the attempts to smear him, it didn't work. So
Mm.
the idea that believing that Palestinians are equal human beings that have equal rights is a political liability in the US is also starting to lose credibility as an argument. And you can even see that in the fact that you have not just on you know the Democratic or independent side of the aisle that would be more left leaning, but even on the right leaning side of more like independent Republican Party candidates or representatives, more criticism of US policy vis-a-vis Israel. There is a growing, I mean, because look at the polling in the US. There's a massive shift in polling in the US in terms of support for Israel and support versus support for Palestinians.
Mm.
So those shifts are creating at least a little bit of pressure points that might be the kinds of things that we need to see internally in order for something to change. I mean, we quite literally, we need the leadership to change if we want the policies to change.